So this is the next continuation part of earthquakes, and in this we'll be learning the primary effects of earthquake and how we can measure an earthquake. So let us start with the first primary effect. So these include all such effects that are directly related to the cause of origin of an earthquake. The tectonic earthquakes are often responsible for producing many important changes in the geological structure of an area. First one is creation of slopes or scarps. So we have learned even in the faulting chapter that they can create nearly vertical slopes, right? So this earthquake is nothing but faulting happening in a particular area. So you can see that nearly vertical slopes could be created because of earthquakes. Second is fissures, that is separation of land mass. So fissures is separation of landmass. Third is warping of strata. So and the fourth is emergence or subsidence of coastlines. There have been many evidences that because of the tsunami that took place in 2004, many islands, new islands were formed and many islands got submerged. So this is the same thing, emergence or subsidence of coastlines or of landforms. Then changes in the courses of streams, so stream directions may change because of earthquakes. And fourth is origin of new springs. So springs, these are called as artesian wells, and we'll be learning about them in detail because we have it in our syllabus, the artesian wells. And because of earthquakes there may be a new origin of these kind of springs. So there is this line, you see, this is called as phreatic line or the atmospheric line, and if water is present above this line, this will cause more pressure here and the spring will, or the water will just burst out from this place. So this is how the springs are created. You might have learnt in fluid mechanics that pressure along a single datum remains constant. So whatever pressure is there here, the same pressure should be there here as well. So the height to which this spring will rise would be this height, because it has to maintain the same pressure. Next is creation of sand dikes, in which saturated layer of sand may be forced up into existing cracks and crevices. We have come across this term dikes in the igneous rocks, and in that we had seen that how the magmatic intrusions, when they are when they are vertical and they go into some sedimentary beds, those are called as dikes. So here we are using the word sand dikes, that is sand is intruded between the bedding layers. So you can see here that in between there is some unconformity or some this layer is not continuous throughout, right? There is suddenly a vertical layer present. So these are your sand dikes, and they can also be produced because of, as an effect of earthquake. Secondary effects, these include all those effects of earthquakes which damage various constructions and other geological features. So due to vibrations, buildings, bridges, dams, they get damaged slightly or heavily. So these are considered as the secondary effects. The primary effects were all on the geological aspects and all on the landforms. The secondary effects are all on the structures that are created on those landforms. So because of the vibrations, we know that earthquakes can be detrimental to buildings, and many dams get cracked and bridges are also affected because of that. So you can see here in this picture image also how the buildings are adversely affected by earthquakes. Another secondary effect of earthquake is tsunami. So tsunamis are also created because of earthquakes. When the earthquakes happen inside the ocean, they create huge waves, and I had given this particular example in my previous lectures also, that how tsunamis are created because of the P waves, that is the push and pull waves, and the shear waves are absent in that, right? Trees, electric poles, cables and water pipes are often damaged severely. So these also come under secondary effects. Whatever man-made things are there, if they get damaged, that is because of the secondary effect. Now, recording of the earthquake. So an earthquake is a result of release of energy, the energy that is released during the faulting process. Second, acceleration of ground. When the ground accelerates, the earthquake happens. And third, propagation of the seismic waves through the ground. So the medium through which the earthquake delivers its energy is through the waves, through the seismic waves. So for recording the earthquake, we have something called as seismographs. Seismographs are equipments through which we record an earthquake. An earthquake is going to generate three types of waves. We have learned P waves, S waves and L waves. If we are able to record any one of these waves, we can say that we have recorded an earthquake. Any one or all of them, if we record, we can say that we have recorded an earthquake. So how to record this? Recording is done by seismograph, and the recording of seismograph is called as seismograms. So they look something like this. You can see in this image. So the instrument that is used to record earthquake is called a seismograph, and the recordings of seismograph are called as seismograms. Okay. Seismograph is of pendulum types of seismographs are used the most. Now, what are these pendulum types of seismographs? The essential part of such a seismograph is a pendulum which swings in a fixed plane. So you can see in this image, this is a very simplified sketch of a seismograph, and this is that pendulum mass that is attached to this boom, and when the earthquake happens, this pendulum starts oscillating, and to the pendulum we have attached a pen sort of thing, a recording pen, and here we have a drum over which a paper is rolled. So when the earthquake happens, this drum automatically starts rotating, and because we have attached this pen to the pendulum, when the pendulum oscillates, that pen will also oscillate, and that pen will do the markings on this paper which is rotating. So we get a particular type of seismograph that we saw previously, something like this. It just goes on recording the earthquake, and these seismograms which the seismograph records, it is unique to every earthquake. We can say that seismograms are kind of fingerprints of every earthquake. Every person has a unique fingerprint, so every earthquake is going to have a unique seismogram. And in fact, till now, whatever earthquakes have taken place or whatever earthquakes we have recorded, we have given it a particular name. So if you want to find any earthquake, you can find it using the name given to it, and it is stored in a database which is accessible to all. So you can get the seismograms of particular earthquakes by searching them. In normal times, the pendulum remains at rest, that is when the earthquake is not happening. During an earthquake, its oscillations or deflections are recorded with desired magnifications by means of properly designed devices working on the principle of light beams, variable mechanical levers, transformers or magnetic tapes. So there is some modification that can be done to this simplified arrangement so that we get some magnified seismograms. In the simplest case, a seismograph consists of a pendulum, that is a heavy mass attached to a delicate boom suspended with a vertical axis through a tie, and it can easily oscillate. In front of the pendulum is a drum capable of rotating at a fixed speed. This is that drum, and having threaded axis of rotation so that it can advance during the rotation. A paper is wrapped over the drum. The boom is provided with a recording device such as a pointed pencil levered to it. So this is what I was telling you. It is provided with a recording thing like a pen or a pencil, and the drum is provided with a clock and a time marking device. So this drum is also provided with a clock so that you can understand that for how much time that earthquake had taken place, and every stroke on that seismogram for how much time it was happening. The assembly is normally at rest except the clock But the moment a shock is received by the seismograph, the boom starts oscillating, the drum starts rotating, and the time marker records the time of the disturbance on the paper. So the clock is always in motion, the clock is never at rest, but the pendulum, the boom, and the drum, they are at rest when the earthquake is not taking place. The moment this pendulum starts oscillating, the drum starts rotating, there is a mechanism to it, and the clock then marks the time at which the drum starts rotating. So from that time till the time the pendulum is taking the reading, that can be found. The sensitivity of seismograph is related primarily to design period T of the pendulum. So every pendulum will have a time period, right? You might have studied this in your physics as well. 2 pi under root of L by G, right? T is 2 pi root of L by G, right? You might have studied this formula where L is the length of the pendulum and all. Based on this, a seismograph may record ground acceleration, ground velocity, or mere ground displacement. So there are three things that can be recorded using a seismograph. First is ground acceleration, ground velocity, and ground displacement. All three are important, and majorly our Indian code, there is we have Indian standard codes for designing buildings for earthquakes, and that code is IS 1893 2016. So 2016 is the revision, this is the number of that, and IS means Indian standard. So Indian standard code of 1893 2016 is what we use for designing earthquake resistant buildings, and in that code we use the ground acceleration. So when T, that is the time period of the pendulum, is shorter as compared to the period of ground motion, the deflection induced would be broadly proportional to the ground acceleration. So if the time period of the pendulum is less than the time period of the ground motion, look, the ground is also oscillating. So we need to first understand that anything that oscillates, it is going to have a time period. When an earthquake occurs, the ground oscillates, so it is also going to have a time period. Our pendulum is oscillating, that is also having its own time period. So when the T, that is time period of the pendulum, is less than the time period of the ground motion, what is recorded on the seismograph is ground acceleration. So such an instrument is called as an accelerometer, and records produced by it are called as accelerograms, which are often used by the design engineers in the study of response of buildings to earthquake shock. So this is what I was telling you, that these accelerograms are given in our IS 1893. We call it as a response spectrum of acceleration. So it is a little bit a higher level, you don't have to actually study that. When T is very long compared to the period of the ground motion, the deflections would be approximately proportional to that of the displacement of the ground. This is called as displacement type of seismograph. So when the time period of the pendulum is long as compared to the time period of the ground motion, then what we get is a displacement type of seismograph. Next is locating the epicenter. So how to locate this epicenter? We have studied that the epicenter is the point on the ground from where the intensity of the earthquake is maximum, and it is exactly on top of the focus, right? We have studied this in the first lecture of earthquakes. But how to locate that epicenter location? So the epicenter of the earthquake is approximately calculated on the basis of the fact that P waves and the S waves have difference in their velocities, and they both are recorded at different time intervals on a seismograph. So we know that P waves are the fastest and the S waves are slower than the P waves. So this first this much portion is your P wave, and then the S wave comes and then it is joined to the P waves, and we get more intensity of vibrations, right? So how to take into advantage of this fact in locating the epicenter? So if time interval between P and S wave is known, epicenter distance can be found, but direction cannot be determined. So how? What I mean by this, we'll see. Now we have P and S waves, that it is plotted on the graph. Distance is on the x-axis and time taken by that particular wave is on the y-axis. This is the P wave, compression wave, and this is for S wave. So this graph we can plot, you are knowing the velocity of P wave and S wave. Now what we need is just the time interval between the P wave and S wave. So for let us just take an example. For an earthquake occurring in Maharashtra, a seismograph S1 recorded a P wave at 1:30 p.m. and it recorded the S wave at 1:34 p.m. Okay. Find the distance of epicenter from this. So time interval between P wave and S wave was how much? 134 minus 130 is 4 minutes. So 4 minutes of time interval is there. And on this y-axis we have time. So this is 1, 2, 3 and 4 minutes, right? So what we can do, we can take a strip of paper, we can just align it like this, we can mark 2 points, that is 4 minutes, and then we can use this strip of paper to check that where these 2 points are coinciding. So at this particular location you can see that these 2 points are coinciding, and on that location the distance is how much? Around 2500 kilometers, right? So the epicenter from where the seismograph S1 is located, from that point the epicenter is 2500 kilometers away. See, this is just an example. This is no data is taken from an actual earthquake, just an example. So from the location of the seismograph S1, the epicenter is at a distance of 2500 kilometers. So this is how we can find the location of the epicenter. But this is how we can find the distance of epicenter, but we cannot find the exact point. Why? Because even if we know it is 2500 kilometers, what it will give us, let's say this is S1, so 2500, but from where? So we get a circle of 2500, a radius of 2500. Okay, so the epicenter can be anywhere on this point. So can we find the epicenter using one seismograph? The answer is no. So let us say that we take one more seismograph. So let us take data from one more seismograph, let's say it's S2, and let the time interval for S2 be 6 minutes. So that is the time interval between P wave and S wave is 6 minutes for seismograph S2. So we mark 6 minutes here and then we check where it is coinciding. So it is coinciding here at a distance of 4000 kilometers from S2. So from seismograph S2 our epicenter is at 4000 kilometers. So let's say that S2 was here, this seismograph recorded that earthquake. We will again draw a circle of radius 4000 kilometers. Now it is intersecting with our S1 circle, but it is intersecting at 2 points, here and here. So now again we have this ambiguity that whether the epicenter is here or whether it is here. We are not sure about that. So does two seismograph find you the exact location of epicenter? The answer is again no. It will give you two probable locations of epicenter. So we have to use one more seismograph and let the time interval for third seismograph be 2 minutes, that is between the P wave and S wave. So we mark 2 minutes and we check where it is there. This has to be 2 minutes. So this is 2 minutes and this is for seismograph S3, and the distance from this seismograph S3 is 1200 kilometers. So let's say that S3 was here, and now when we draw this circle of 1200 we got one point, and this is the point of epicenter. So I hope you understood how we have to find epicenter, and for finding epicenter we need at least 3 seismographs. So this is that point. So this was it for today's lecture, and in the next lecture we'll be starting with a new topic. Then take care. Thank you.